Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Read Like a Man podcast. Today I have a super special guest with me. This is not only the woman who gave me life, this also happens to be the woman who taught me how to read. So I'd like to welcome my mom, Chipley Gordon, onto the show today.
Thanks, honey.
You're welcome.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So we don't have bourbon this time. We have coffee this time because we're in the middle of a family vacation and it has been quite busy. But leading up to that, I talked to my mom about a month and a half or so ago and was like, hey, we read Don Quixote in high school together. I read it with her. She also read it with all three of my brothers and both sisters.
I don't think I read it with the girls.
Okay. Bliss was saying that she read it, but I don't think she read it with you. I think she just read it.
I think she did too.
Just because, or, whatever. But so I was like, hey, you've read this before. Do you want to read Don Quixote with me again? And then we can film a podcast episode and talk about it when we come out there in a couple months. So that's what we did. We chugged through, if you can see that, this beast of a book. My copy was 900 and... Well, all right, let's just compare. Let's compare pages.
Well, you had a whole lot of
I had more
supplements
notes and stuff. So mine was 982 pages. So, yeah, beast of a book. But yeah, so that's what we're going to talk about this episode. I thought it would be super fun to be able to bring Mom on, have the perspective from my end of having read this book again 10 years after the first time that I read it, but then also for her of reading it the fifth time.
Fourth
time, fifth time, something like that. So... so I have some notes here, but just starting out, in general, how was it for you reading it again for the fourth or fifth or whatever time?
Well,
did you still like it? Sorry,
yes, I did still like it, and I found that I picked up other stories that I didn't pick up the last times that I read it. Everybody knows Don Quixote for the windmills, but the lions in the cage, I had forgotten about those, there's so many. I couldn't write it all down, but there are just so many different ones that I'm like, oh yeah, or I underlined something different. That I have a lot of underlining. A lot of it the same as what I did before. I mean, the funny parts are the funny parts.
Yeah,
but
this is the same book that you've read.
This is the same book.
The same physical book.
Yeah, the poor thing. It's in pretty bad shape.
Yeah, it's the covers falling off. And all the stuff. My copy is brand new. That's the copy that I read a decade ago when I read it.
All of our notes from everybody that read it.
Yeah, we have all of our
and my cover
notes.
Come off, and it's duct taped, and it's a mess.
There you go. The one thing, I was trying to remember what I remembered from Don Quixote, and the one thing that I swear I will never forget from the book, from the first time that I read it, was just the word eructing.
Yes, we've used that word ever since.
We've literally used it all the time since then. Every time someone burps, we just talk about someone erupting.
It's such a great word.
I was like, I can't remember half of what this book was about. I remember that I liked it. That's pretty much all, but above everything, just what will always stick in my mind is that I remember that I learned the word eructing from the first time that I read Don Quixote.
It was probably the only word in the whole book you ever looked up.
Probably.
Because it was
just in context.
Don Quixote was telling Sancho, don't belch. And so I think having that word, you're like, so what is this eructing?
Yeah.
I think that's the only reason we ever looked it up. But it was so funny.
Oh, it totally was. So it was very interesting being able to come back to this book a decade after having read it originally. And what was that? Wow. I don't know.
Doing something it's not supposed to be.
Somebody is not professional over here with their
What'd I do?
Do not disturbs happening. I don't know. All right. Well, here we go. So coming back to it a decade later for me was really, really interesting. And surprisingly not remembering that much about it. Just remembering, I liked it and I want to read it again. But I don't really know what to expect going into it again this time. So so some of the questions that I had written down, the biggest stuff for me from this time of reading through it was, and we kind of have already talked about this, but it's just this idea of the whole book is really just this examination of madness and insanity versus sanity and this spectrum that like I kind of come away from it feeling like part of what the lesson is like everybody lives somewhere on this spectrum. Like no one's all the way over in the perfectly sane, and you know, like we all have our own form of insanity that is crazy to someone else, but that doesn't seem crazy to us.
Right.
You know, and so one of the big questions that I came from or went into it trying to answer, and then came out of it still kind of unsure of what my answer is like, if you had to say yes or no, when you look at Don Quixote, was he truly mad or not? Because there's such this juxtaposition between these insane things that he does and then these moments of like such brilliance that you're just like, I don't even know how you could have come up with something like that.
Well, and also when he would go into his seemingly ridiculous seeing goats walking along and it was an army marching or whatever it was, and yet when he would tell them what he had to do his job, that was pretty sane. I mean, you know, respectful, honest, do the right thing, take care of the widow and the orphan.
The widows and orphans.
Yeah.
That was the word. That was my word through this time.
Yeah.
Was succor.
Yeah.
Succor the widows and orphans.
And so he would go crazy in these things, and then but in his reasoning for taking care of them, I thought was very same.
Yeah.
I mean, it made perfect sense in the character. I don't know. I mean, I'm not that well read, but I've never read a book that bounces back and forth between sanity and insanity and pulls all the people in the insanity part of it the way this book does. Yeah, because like for me, like I say, I went into it with that kind of main question, especially because, again, my shout out every single video is Benjamin McAvoy. He has a Before You Read Don Quixote, and that was the emphasis on a lot of his video was like go into it and try to answer this question. It was like, is he truly mad? Is he truly insane? Or is everyone else the crazy people? Because they, you know, and so the main question that I came out of it with was like, okay, if he was mad throughout the book, the people around him are kind of like, in general, the people closest to him are trying to get him to not be mad. You know, like they're trying to like cure his madness. In the first part of the book, yeah, but the second part of the book with the Duke and the Duchess, I mean, they went on and on. So we have those that enjoyed the playing with him and playing along with him, and then his family, his niece and his housekeeper or whatever he called her, and the friends that were like, he needs help.
Yeah. And what's funny is like it just made me think of it, like popped in my head with the whole like what Jesus talked about of like no prophet is accepted in his hometown.
Right.
You know? And it's just like he goes and deals with these other people and they're like, this is so much fun.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, let's have fun.
Like why not embrace his games, you know?
And he was admired even in certain aspects of him with those people. There was an admiration about him because he's so gentlemanly.
Yeah.
I mean,
and that's what stuck out to me was this idea of like, and let me see if I can find. There's a couple of different passages that I had.
I wish I had all mine marked. They're so good.
About this. I think this one's further on. But he was talking about what being a knight errant has given him as far as direction, essentially, and like what to do. Yeah, so here he says,
what chapter?
Speaking, this is part 1, chapter 50, chapter L.
Oh, 50.
But he says, speaking for myself, I can say that ever since I became a knight errant, I have been courageous, polite, generous, well-bred, magnanimous, courteous, bold, gentle, patient, and long-suffering in the face of toil, imprisonment, and enchantment. And there's so much of that to me that stuck out in multiple parts of the book, where it's just like, one, the first part of it is just this clarity that like, because he has this ideal image and he knows like, this is who I am, like I am a knight errant, it brings this kind of like all the Jamie Winship stuff with like the identity, where it's like, he knows his identity and so he knows what to do. And he's like, this is my identity. I am this. Therefore, I know exactly what to do in every situation. And he never sits there and is like, oh, I'm not sure if I should do this, or if like, should I do this? Should I?
Yeah.
He's just like, boom, and he knows. But then beyond that, as you go further into the book where you hit this part, it's like, not only does he know that, but then he does it. Like he's actually doing it.
Well, and the funny thing is that when he does all these brave and courageous and knightly, wonderful things, when it all goes wrong, he always says he was enchanted.
He knows the answer to it.
Yeah,
Like he knows the explanation.
There's an X. He can explain himself out of anything.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got it all under control.
Yeah.
There are very few times that I even know that where he was, when the cat attacked his nose.
Oh gosh.
He had to stay in bed for a while with that one.
Yes.
But he always had an answer. He always had an answer.
Yeah.
And found himself out in another way, and it was pretty funny.
Yeah, no, I love that because, like, yeah, with that, it made so much more sense to me too, and just this correlation between his life and like the Christian life as well. When something goes wrong, right? And like I think about it all the time of like, there's an easy explanation for me of like, there's sin, and that's what causes this thing. You know, it's like his enchantment thing. I'm like, well, obviously that didn't work out because there's this force that's against me.
Right.
But having that framework and worldview makes it, again, like it was easy to know what to do in the first point because you knew your identity, right? And then when it didn't work out, it's easy to have an explanation and then to know what to do again. And if you don't have that like explanation piece, then you just kind of sit there and it's just like, well, now what? Like now what do I do? You know, I don't know how to explain
Get
this.
out of this one.
Therefore, I don't know how to move forward.
Right.
You know?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that was just such a fascinating piece of it to me, is just the clarity that identity gives him in all these different situations, right? Whether things are going well or whether things are going poorly.
Well, and not only for himself, but also for his faithful Sancho. I mean, he was such a faithful person. He knew exactly the way he would berate him and get after him when he was mad at him was just hysterical. And the love between the two of them, in spite of that, their appreciation and love of one another was so great that Don could say whatever he wanted to Sancho, and it didn't matter.
Any of these things.
It didn't matter.
Yeah, I have to find. I don't think I bookmarked that pace, but I'll find it. So while I'm looking for this, one of the questions that I had too was when you compare the Don and Sancho, if you're thinking about that madness thing and that insanity thing, right? There's the old saying that's, who's more the fool or the fool who follows him.
Yes.
And so in that, when you ask the question of was Don Quixote mad, then it becomes a question of who was more mad. Was it Don Quixote or was it Sancho who was following his madness and even at many, many times like realizes, like that's what fascinated me towards the end of the book is there's this point where Sancho is the one making up the lie. Like he knows it's not true because he's the one literally making it up. Like I didn't go see Dulcinea del Torba or whatever her name is. I can't say her name right now. But he's like, I didn't go see her and I'm just going to say that I did and all this. But then later on, someone says something and convinces him that his lie was an enchantment of something else, and so it's like Don is like deceived by him, but then he's like double deceived in his deceiving.
Yeah, I mean it's
and you're just like, wait, what?
What's going on here? How do they even keep up with it? Is beyond me.
Yeah. Okay. So I found this part. This was I loved. I forgot to bookmark this, but I did dog ear it. But this was this part where Don Quixote just rails on Sancho. And he says, "Oh, you villainous peasant, lout, jackanapes, ignoramus, gibberer, foul-mouthed, malapert, backbiter, scandalmonger. How dare you speak such words in my presence and in that of these illustrious ladies, or allow such insolent indecencies into your discorded imagination? Begone from my presence, you monster of nature, depository of lies, storehouse of deceit, silo of knavery, inventor of evil, proclaimer of nonsense, enemy of the respect that is due to royal persons. Begone, get out of my sight under pain of incurring my wrath." was just like, I just like wrote it in the side of my book. I'm like, damn, son.
I know. It's so funny. And what kills me is how Cervantes comes up with all of that. I mean, all of that. But I also love Sancho Panza's proverbs because they just infuriated Don Quixote to death, and he would just say, "You and your string
you
of
and your dad-burned proverbs.
Don't you know you're a squire and you're not supposed to talk to me unless I speak to you?" And
yeah.
And then he calls him all those things. I couldn't even come up with all the places in the book where he did that. The book would be so dog-eared.
It's so.
You know
many
me,
lines.
I don't like the dog-eared my book, but I finally decided this one I could.
Yeah.
Because it's falling apart.
Yeah. I finally. How long ago was that? It's probably been about a year that I finally just decided that I was gonna dog-ear my pages for the places in the book because I'm always marking it up, right? I'm always doing all this kind of stuff, but there was always parts where I would know, I want to come back and reference this. If I'm talking to someone or like anytime this book comes up, I know I'm going to talk about this one passage. And so that's where I finally started going, okay, well, I'm going to start dog-earing those pages. And then I kind of combined it with when I've been reading nonfiction books, I've been making...
Excuse me, I'm so sorry.
I've been making book notes from those. So I have that folder on my phone. And basically what I'm trying to do with that is take all of the stuff that stuck out the most to me from that particular book and what like I thought was the best. And so that's how I'll read all the way through the book, and then when I go to make that book notes folder, I'll just come back through and just look at the stuff that I dog-eared, right? So
the problem is that there's so many in this book.
Yeah, I know. I mean, like, I don't know if you can see on the camera in this, but there is like a boatload.
And if you've never read...
so many.
Really, and never read this book, even the fun part of it, and I wrote on many different places, that I love the titles.
Oh, the titles to the chapters.
The way he even made the titles to the chapters.
Oh my gosh.
They're so creative and I mean, it tells you exactly, I mean, you know what's going to happen, but...
Yeah, I loved how many times...
these are only parts of them. You have to find them in the book.
Yeah, okay, so I think this has all of them.
Oh, yours does.
Like, relating the extraordinary event which can count as an adventure that happened to Don Quixote. But I love how many times in the titles it just says something like, and other things worthy to be read.
Yes.
And like other things worthy to be talked about, and other things indisputable to this history, and other things of note,
They're so funny. There is funny and interesting as his writing itself.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's not like it's just a chapter number and
this is
whatever.
chapter 47.
This continues the ludicrous stories of whatever.
Well,
I saw the one of Trafalgar, and I don't know.
Yeah.
The one where I wrote.
Yeah.
Oh, he says, the adventures of the enchanted head with other childish matters which cannot be omitted.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like just hysterical.
Chapter 70, which follows 69.
Yes.
It's like, duh.
I know. I mean,
this is chapter 70, which comes after chapter 69.
You don't say.
And contains matters that are indispensable for the comprehension of this history.
And then, in not knowing the book, how he relates and quotes the guy who really did try to write it.
Oh, yeah. So, if you don't know this, Don Quixote was written in two parts, right? And after Cervantes published the first part, there was a false prophet who came along and wrote the second part, wrote like a follow-up book and was like, oh, this is the continuation of the adventures of Don Quixote. And so Cervantes got pissed, and then he busted through the second book. I forget how fast he wrote it, but it was like so fast that he writes the second book. And then the best thing about it is it gets like so meta, because in his second book, he's referencing the dude that wrote the false history and like making fun of it, and so the real Don Quixote is like making all these comments about how this is so stupid that I would never have done what this dude claims I did.
Or he didn't go to the one city to fight.
Yeah,
specifically because the bogus one in the other book. That's where he had him go, and he goes, "Well, I'm not doing that because we're not going to make it
Yeah.
look
I won't
like
even give
it
it a
might
chance.
be the same.
Yeah.
And
Like we never even went to that city
so
at all.
it's just hysterical. And in some ways, because we got busy and we were trying to hurry up and finish it, it got a little bit tough in just trying to hurry up and finish.
We kind of rushing at the end a little bit.
Yeah, but it was so funny. I mean, really.
Well, and so what's crazy too is one of my bookmarks, I had a reference to Blood Meridian, and talking about the chapter things. What was so interesting about that is in Blood Meridian, it's written like kind of like the very old Westerns, which is not even the chapter description like that. It's like every scene of the chapter is just list. So it's like chapter 50, and then it just lists like every single thing that happens, like a synopsis of the chapter.
Oh, wow.
With just like bullets in between all of them, you know? And so that was super interesting. That was one of the things that Ben said with reading that book of like, take advantage of the chapter summaries at the beginning to kind of help frame like what's going to happen in your mind, because that's a difficult book.
That's cool.
But what was great to me with that was at the beginning of Don Quixote in chapter 4, there's a part where another guy, Don is talking to this kid about his master becoming a knight, and Don Quixote says, provided that he gives me his oath by the laws of the order of chivalry into which he has been admitted, I shall allow him to go free and personally guarantee the payment. Think what you're saying, sir, said the lad. My master here isn't a knight at all, and he's never been admitted into any order of chivalry. Just Juan Haldudo, the rich farmer from Quintanar. That is of little consequence, replied Don Quixote. There is no reason why someone with a plebeian name should not be a knight, for every man is the child of his own deeds. And I love that, and it made me think of like my favorite line from Blood Meridian, which is in the opening of the book, and it's this scene of this young kid, and he's like referencing how violent this kid was just at a young age, and he had this line, the child, the father of the man.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, holy hell, is that a line? Like,
yeah, that's a good line.
But then reading this, every man is the child of his own deeds. And I was just like, it just immediately connected those two words
and that's
for me.
what's fun in reading.
I was just like, oh, wow, yeah, that's so cool. And I just love that. It doesn't matter if he has a plebeian name. Like, he can be a knight. If he's knightly,
yes,
and he acts knightly, then he can be a knight, period. And that's all that it takes and all that it is.
Isn't that funny?
And
that's so fun.
So I love that. And then like going to one of my next quotes was like, just going to that, like, I know how I'm supposed to act because I have this identity of a knight errant. And he said, if I do not utter any complaint about the pain, it is because knights errants are not permitted to complain about wounds, even if their entrails are spilling out of them. It's so
funny,
gosh, dude. Yes, like
there's so many.
Love it.
It's just really almost too many in a short conversation to be able to go because the one where he was in the inn and the Maritime, the little huzzy girl came in and she was going to go with the other guy in the room with him.
Like the driver of the ox driver or whatever.
And she got on his bed and he thought it was her. And I mean, for him.
Yeah.
And, my gosh, it was. And then when he slashed the bag of wine all over everywhere, the wineskins,
blood
it
everywhere.
was just.
It was so great.
So are we? Is this for folks who have never read Quixote or thinking or?
At this point, I would say it's both. This is obviously not spoiler free, but again, like this book is kind of less important for spoilers, if you will, than like The Count of Monte Cristo. Like there's a ton of plot twists and stuff. It's like, I don't want to find that out yet.
Yeah, right.
And so that was one of the questions that I had was like, okay, now you've read this book a bunch of times. Who do you think this book is for? Who would you recommend it to, right? Because personally, I don't think this is one that I would just be like, oh, anybody and everybody, like Anna Karenina. Like Kim and I joke, Anna Karenina is the perfect comp title. Like whatever book you've read that you liked, and you're like, what should I read next? And we're like, just read Anna Karenina.
Well, I haven't read that one, so I'm falling behind for them.
We're working on that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, so who would you say
that this book was for?
Is for, right?
Well, he writes so incredibly beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And he does not, probably the one word that he used more than any other word that I could pick up on in the book is peerless. Oh, the women were peerless.
Yeah.
But every other thing, I found quotes in this book that I still use today, which I wish I could done.
Let that be a lesson to you.
Yes, or do something to be able to remember them different. I don't know. Maybe I want to remember this in a pen that's a specific color. I use a pencil.
Another one of the notes that I have in my phone is like my life quotes, and it's literally where I take all those book notes, and if there's something that like really sticks out from any of those, like from that Warrior Poet Way book that I was letting you read this morning, John Lovell said, "When a man fears discomfort, danger is not far off." And I was just like, oh, bro, like that is a whole nother level of. And so like that goes into this like smaller collection of notes. That's like, this has to be very accessible.
I told you I wrote it in my daily worksheet. The one quote from Don Quixote that I never caught anywhere in other readings was he said, "The pen is the writing of the soul," or something.
Yeah.
And I don't even remember where it is, but I wrote that down because I thought that's so cool. So his soul, Cervantes is, I don't know, revealing something in his soul. Very educated man.
Yeah.
If I were more educated, I would know the difference between the history.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Because your book didn't have all these notes.
No, I didn't have all those
notes. My book
so
literally has...
I started looking through yours.
Yeah, it has 983...
Because I like that. That's even though I don't retain it.
Well, my book has like 40-some pages of notes just talking about like all the things that he references.
Right, and so the translator, the person who translates is very important. Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
so that was a fun thing too. Was I had
to try and find.
This one is the John Rutherford translation, which is fairly new.
Mine is J.M. Cohen, but this was
J.M. Cohen. That was like the 1951, I think.
Oh, I'm not.
And mine was in 2000.
Oh, yeah.
I'm pretty sure yours was.
Yes, this translation first published in 1950.
Yeah. So, that was super fun. It's fun to be able to compare and contrast like some of those some of those things. So some of them, like some of the ones that we've looked at were pretty different.
Yeah.
But then some of them were kind of like, oh, that's
pretty much the same. I mean,
basically the same thing.
But that does make a difference too.
The one that I would say, actually, one more quote before we go to that, because this was just literally one of my favorite ones. Talking again about this ideal that we're supposed to live up to, right? And he says, "In slaying giants, we must slay pride. In our generosity and magnanimity, we must slay envy. In our tranquil demeanor and serene disposition, we must slay anger. In eating as little as we do, and keeping vigil as much as we do, we must slay gluttony and somnolence. In our faithfulness to those whom we have made the mistress of our thoughts, we must slay lewdness and lust. In wandering all over the world in search of opportunities to become famous knights as well as good Christians, we must slay sloth." And I was just like, dude, like, how much more of like a guideline for like, this is how you should live?
Well,
because it's just like so good.
It's so good. But I tell you, and I believe the same thing this time as I did any of the other times. The chapters when Sancho was given the governorship of the isle, which wasn't even an isle, and he never even knew it.
It was a random town.
Don Quixote's letter to him for managing it, I wrote in my book, and this was one of the last times
what I just turned to.
That these two chapters should be read aloud because, and not only that, but this joke on Sancho. They gave him this governorship, and all these people's plan was to come foil him.
Yeah.
And he ended up telling them things that amazed them.
Yeah, like just outwitting all of them.
Yeah.
So I feel it's like the coming to Jesus thing with these questions. You're like, haha, I got him now.
Yeah, we're gonna
he's just like, oh, here you go.
We're gonna have a lot of fun with this dodo brain. And then they bring it to him, and he says something smart, and it's like, how do you think you're a governor? We're not even on an island, and yet you give these answers that are viable and they're good.
Yeah, they're crazy.
And well thought out. I mean, it is really amazing.
One of my favorite things from that whole thing, I just literally have this letter from Don Quixote to Sancho Panza, the governor. And I actually marked 2 different pages here because the other one was page 766 in my book.
Oh, well, we can't.
And it was 2 different points where he tells him. So the first one, is when the Duke is talking to Sancho.
Oh, yes.
And he said, one's clothes must suit the position that
Yes.
one occupies because it wouldn't be right for a lawyer to go around dressed as a soldier or a soldier as a priest. And then later on, when Don Quixote sends the letter to Sancho, he says, you should wear the clothes that your office requires, ensuring that they are clean and tidy. Mm-hmm. And I love that because so much in the past year and a half I've been learning through Tanner Guzzi and a couple other guys. There's a channel called Real Men, Real Style, and Antonio is the guy on there. And both of these guys talk about this thing called enclosed cognition. And it's literally when you wear the certain thing, when I wear a cowboy hat, it's the same as the taking on the identity of the knight errant. It's I know how to act because I'm wearing a cowboy hat.
Sancho had, Don Quixote had to have his helmet.
Yeah.
And it was a basin, a barber basin.
Yeah.
But he put that on and it transformed him.
Yeah, and it was just so fascinating to me because I know that I either didn't see that at all the first time reading through it.
Oh, right.
Or I recognized it and I just didn't care because I used to have, before reading Tanner Guzzi and all these guys, I used to be like it doesn't matter. All I care about is my clothes are functional and cheap.
Right.
Whoopee, and so it was so interesting to hear that from 2 different characters giving advice to Sancho about, hey, you're stepping into this role now.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
One of the things you need to keep in mind is that you need to dress appropriately for the role that you're stepping into because it will change how you deal with the role, And that was crazy.
In this one, this was Don Quixote talking to him. He says, firstly, my son, you must fear God, for in fearing him is wisdom, and being wise, you can make no mistake. Secondly, you must consider what you are, seeking to know yourself, which is the most difficult task conceivable.
Oh, yeah.
Know yourself.
I underlined that too. What was that in? That was
in where he was part 2, chapter 42.
42.
I have to look closer.
I know. I gotta look.
Yeah, because I did mark these with a pen because I these were, and they still continue to be my favorite. This is how I'm torn between the sanity and insanity of Don Quixote, because this advice that he gives, it's such a play on brain and knowledge and thinking right and doing right and acting crazy.
Yeah.
It's just wild.
I totally marked that all up too. First, my son, you must fear God, for in the fear of God lies all wisdom.
Yeah.
And if you are wise, you cannot ever err. Secondly, you must always remember who you are and try to know yourself, which is the most difficult knowledge of all to acquire.
I
was like, shit, man.
And that's
my gosh.
That's the kind of advice that he gives all the time, because on the next page he talks about never be guided by arbitrary law, which has generally great influence with the ignorant who set up to be clever. Let poor man's tears find more compassion in you, but not more justice than the pleadings of the rich. And then they go on and on, but I checked these because I really like these. If you should chance to bend the rod of justice, do not let it be with the weight of a bribe, but with that of pity.
Yep.
When you happen to judge the case of some enemy of yours, turn your mind away from your injury and apply it to the truth of the case. Do not let personal passion blind you in another's case, for most of the errors you make will be irremediable. Irremediable. And if you should find a remedy, it will cost you your reputation or even your fortune. And if a beautiful woman comes to beg you for justice, I love this, turn your eyes from her tears.
Yep.
and your ears from her groans, and consider the substance of her plea at leisure, if you do not want your reason to be drowned in her sobs and your honor in her sigh.
Yep.
And or sighs. They were so
good.
Good.
Well, and even in the next chapter after that, like some of the ones I underlined, was he said, "Do not go around, Sancho, with your clothes loose and flapping about you, for untidy dress is a sign of a lackadaisical spirit."
Here's what mine says. Do not go unbelted and loose, for disorderly clothes are the indication of a careless mind.
There you go. And then later on, he had the line that he said, the health of the entire body is forged in the smithy of the stomach.
Yes. I thought that was so, that's where erecting is. He says, take care, Sancho, not to chew on both sides of your mouth, nor to eruct in anyone's presence. This about eruct I don't understand, said Sancho. Eruct, Sancho, said Don Quixote, means belch, and that is one of the coarsest words in the Castilian language, though it is very expressive. And so refined people have resorted, this is what he does all the time, goes into these long things, have resorted to Latin, and instead of belch, say erupt, and for belches, eructations. And if some people do not understand these terms, it is of little consequence, for they will come into use in time, and then they will be generally understood. For that is the way to enrich the language, which depends upon custom and the common people. Indeed, sir, Sancho, I bear your counsel about belching in mind, for I generally do it very often. Eructing, Sancho, not belching, said Don Quixote. Eruct, I shall say from now on, replied Sancho, and I swear I won't forget.
Oh my gosh.
Which he did all the time.
Yep. Well, and then I think the
funny.
last one of all those that I had, there was still so many, but in the next page, he said, moderate your sleep, for he who does not rise with the sun does not enjoy the day. And remember, Sancho, that diligence is the mother of good fortune, and that its opposite, sloth, never attained any worthwhile goal.
And it's just so... Oh, he did say, I did underline this because he said... He was talking about how Sancho can't read or write. And he said how wrong it is for a governor not to be able to read and write. For you must know, Sancho, that for a man to be illiterate or left-handed argues one of two things.
Left-handed.
Yeah. Isn't that funny? Argues one of two things, and he goes on to talk. But he says there's a remedy for everything except death.
I was literally just about to say that. There's a remedy for all things
and
but
there's
death.
So much common sense. It's a book that crosses all barriers, not barriers, but all segments of thinking. Common sense, historical knowledge.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
It's unbelievable. The part that he wrote about poetry, I never caught that before. I couldn't even find that now. But where he was talking and telling the man about the poet, it was so eloquent and so beautiful, and many, many words that I didn't know, and that I had to look.
Well, okay.
So, look, he says, confound you, Sancho, interrupted Don Quixote. 60,000 devils take you in your proverbs. and you've been stringing them together for a whole hour and giving me the pangs of torture with each one. Where does he come up with this? So fun. And when he writes about the day coming, I can't even find it, but it is so beautiful. It's just so beautiful. Such beautiful writing.
It really is. And I gotta find, there's one more part that I want to talk about with you. And of course now I can't find it.
Oh, I know, that's so frustrating.
Put a bookmark on it. It was not this far back, was it? Maybe it was. Hold on here. Oh, okay. So, oh boy. All right. So in part 1, chapter, oh good Lord, 48. Yep. And this is in which the canon continues on the subject of books of chivalry and on other matters worthy of his mind. And it's when he's talking about the plays and how so many of the plays are like not good and they're not worthy and whatever. And so I just took it because I watched, I've shown you some of like the Critical Drinkers videos. And so I'm constantly watching his videos and trying to be more thoughtful in my critique of like modern entertainment, you know, and just seeing this massive downslide and just these just terrible movies that just have no point. Nobody put any effort into them. They're terrible, right? And so there was a couple of lines from all this, because he's specifically talking about this idea that we have to, what people say is like we have to write like for the rabble, you know, like for the common man, because you know they can't understand this, and he's going in and coming against that, and so let's see, where do I want to start here? I'm aware that there are more fools than wise men in the world, and although the praise of the wise few is more important than the mockery of the foolish many, I'm not willing to subject myself to the indiscriminate judgment of the fickle mob, the principal readers of such books. And so he says, if it's no secret that all, or at least most of these fashionable plays, both the purely fictional ones and those based on historical fact, are so much stuff and nonsense, higgledy-piggledy hodgepodges, and yet the masses love them and think they're splendid creations when they're the very opposite. And the authors who write them and the actors who perform them say that it can't be otherwise because that's how people want them, and they wouldn't have them any other way, and that plays which are properly structured and plotted as art demands are only good for the half a dozen intelligent people who understand them, and all the rest are left in the dark about their subtleties, and that it's better to earn a living from the many than approval from the few. And he goes on and refutes this, and he gets down to this part here where he says, so it isn't the masses who are to blame for demanding rubbish, but rather those who aren't capable of providing them with anything else. And it's like one of the guys said at one of the drinkers, they have like the after hours, which is like their panel with a bunch of guys. And there was one of the guys this one time that was talking about modern screenwriters. And he said, he made this statement that I was like, oh my gosh. Because he said they can't write characters because they have no character.
No character.
And he's like, it's not because people are over here demanding all these crap movies and these characters that are just bogus and all this stuff. He's like, it's literally not. It's literally because you can't write good. You can't write goodly.
And really and truly, if this book were a book that was read out loud, like I used to read the G.A. Henty books.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the sentence would go on
for forever.
Half the page. And you have to draw breath to finish the sentence.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people couldn't even get through.
Yeah, couldn't even do it.
Couldn't even get through and understand. Sometimes I feel that way.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I put here, it reminded me of the movie The Greatest Showman, because he was talking about the effects, of a good, basically it's like talking about like the goal of a play is for people to be entertained, and whatever. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be this great thing, right? It can just be this like garbage, whatever. Yeah. And as long as people are entertained, like who cares, right? And he says, to this I'd reply that this end would be far, far better achieved with good plays than with bad ones, because the audience that has gone to see an ingenious and well-crafted play comes out at the end cheered by its jests, instructed by its truths, amazed at its action, wiser thanks to its speeches, warned by its roguery, shrewder for its examples, incensed against vice, and enamored of virtue. For a good play will provoke all these reactions in anyone who watches it, including the most slow-witted of yokels. And it's absolutely impossible for a play possessing these qualities not to cheer and entertain, satisfy and please far more than one that lacks them, as do nearly all of those performed nowadays,
which is so funny, because this book was written when?
Yeah, way back in like the 1600s. Yeah, I was thinking of doing.
And so he talks about nowadays. Well, so now we know what we're really up against.
Oh yeah.
If this, he's writing like this and saying it's poor.
Yeah, saying it's poor
compared to what we read today. I mean, I think, Aunt Mitzi did this 30-day writing thing for her blog that she does, and the lady gave them ideas on what to write, and she said, well, we'll write on 6th grade level, and then she said, no, write it on the 4th grade level.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, that's what they're telling people, write it on the 4th grade level, because heavens above, even if you go to high school, apparently they couldn't understand it.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Yeah, you need to be able to read better than a 4th grade level
to read this book.
Through this book. I will say that for sure.
Yeah, and if you do like Mortimer Adler, which I have had such a hard time, and his advice of reading through and never looking up any word. Just read through the book so that you can understand the book, and then go back through and start looking up.
Doing it again.
I have gotten so sometimes I'll just underline the book so that I mean the word that I don't know, so that I can go back. And then this book has Latin in it also that I have to look up.
Yeah, I got to look that up all the time. Yeah.
But that makes it a little bit easier too.
Yeah. So, okay. So we kind of answered who is it for. If one of the other things I like to do is like a comp title. So that's like if you read Don Quixote and you liked this, what's another book? Like, what book should you read next? Right? So if somebody just finished this, or somebody watches this video and they read Don Quixote and they're like, wow, that was great. Is there any book that comes to mind that's like, oh yeah, you should check this one out as well? That's
kind of a hard question for me, because I would have to say, well, this was more, I would say this book is more entertaining. For me, it was more entertaining. If I knew more history, it probably would have been really good reading, because he had a whole lot about the one soldier.
Yeah.
That I might, in fact, he fought in that war he was writing about. I read that.
Yeah.
But so for me, it would be hard to say, because then I'd have to go, okay, so you read this one. It was a little bit long, a little bit tough, but way funny. Are you wanting a funny book or a serious one? So it'd be hard for me to answer that without.
That's funny, because I don't know either. I'm like, I was thinking about it earlier, and I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what I would just say. Like, I wouldn't have super solid reasons, right? I would be like, well, like, check out the Count of Monte Cristo, or like, check, that's just like, well, here's another classic, like another big classic.
Yeah, and it's
really good, and you would like it, but I don't have a specific.
I don't have a huge repertoire of classics
it would
either.
Be this.
But I tried to get Aunt Kay to read it. She got through the first book and never picked up the second. So when I told her we were going through this this time, I believe if we not started and had a set date out a little bit further, I probably could have gotten her to go through it, because it is a challenge to a degree. I mean, for me it is.
Oh yeah.
Even in the multiple readings, it's still a challenge.
Yeah, it's still. I mean, and that's the thing. Like, that's part of like why we read books like this, is because not solely because it's hard, but partially because it's hard.
Well, just like what he read, exactly what he wrote that you read about the plays. I mean, because we want to find. I mean, I found a whole lot of virtue and funny, but I did also. I have to say this time, and I don't remember this in the other readings. I have to say, in the second part of the book, I was kind of feeling sorry for him, Altisidora. I kind of think that it just went on a little too long with Altisidora.
Yeah, it totally did.
Yeah, and so towards the end of it, I got a little bit more tired of that.
Yeah, because there's a part towards the end here where he said, inside Hamete says even more, he considers that the perpetrators of the hoax were as mad as the victims, and that the Duke and Duchess, going to such lengths to make fun of two fools, were within a hair's breadth of looking like fools themselves.
And
that's what was so interesting to me, was it's like at a certain point, it's like I can forgive, not even forgive, but it's like I can understand, and I don't have a problem with Don Quixote's madness, and then to a point when they're like encouraging and whatever, it's like, oh yeah, this is cool, we're all kind of joining, and then then like same thing, it was like they just hit a point where I'm like, dude, okay, enough is enough. Like, I mean, I did kind of find myself, like,
So the second half of the book went on longer, in the same people still playing these tricks on him. The first part of the book was the shorter, in the ends, and the shorter stories with the people, and just going, you're crazy, get out of here. When he let all the prisoners free, and then he was going to have the young man make the man pay him. Yeah. And he told him to quit whipping him, and then he leaves, and then you find out later,
like right after that, the dude just goes back to
took him back and whipping him and didn't pay him, and so I mean that was kind of funny, because you just read a little bit broader. Yeah. So there was some difference between the first and the second book, but it was all really enjoyable, very enjoyable.
Well, and like what was really stuck out to me was, I'm trying to find where I wrote this note about it, but I can't find it. But it was this idea. Oh, sweet. Okay. So this was when the man from Castile who read the placard on his back cried out.
Oh, and he told him how mad he was.
But he said, "The devil take you, Don Quixote de la Mancha. How on earth have you managed to survive as long as this and not died from all those beatings you've been given? You're a madman, and if you've been mad by yourself and behind the closed doors of your own insanity, it wouldn't have been so bad. But you have the ability to turn everyone who has anything to do with you mad and stupid just like you. And if you don't believe me, you can confirm it in these people riding with you. Go back home, you fool, and look after your property and your wife and children, and drop all this nonsense that's eating your brain away and skimming all the wits off your mind."
It's skimming the wits off your mind. And it's just written so beautiful.
It stuck out to me, and I wrote this note of just this idea of the correlation, and this is going to maybe get a little sketch. We might have... I don't know if I'll have to cut this part. But it's the correlation between this and the trans movement, and how the trans movement, being trans, is fully dependent upon you denying something in reality, but then also forcing everyone else around you to deny that thing in reality as well.
Right.
Right? And to just view reality as something else. Right? And the interesting thing for me was that this idea that, again, like we're all on this spectrum. Like none of us are fully sane. That's the whole, in my opinion, that's like the whole message of this book, is like we all have our own version of insanity. And what is sane to us is insane to someone else, and what is insane to someone else is sane to us, right? But the part of what was kind of starting to work out in me is this idea that what defines when that is okay, or when we should be okay with it or not, is when either it's kind of just harmless and we're all just having fun, or when it's actually it just makes things better. You know, like Don Quixote is like, he lives with more patience and virtue and all this stuff, you know, that he said, versus what kind of starts to happen, and what I think Cervantes was trying to get to at the end, is this like one when you're forcing other people to have to accept your madness instead of just like, no, like he never really does that, right? He's just like, this is what it is. And so it becomes bad when you're saying, no, you have to think what I think, versus just being okay with somebody doesn't. You know, well, he's like, it was enchantment, and they're like, no, it's not. And he's like, well, I don't care. I know what I know.
Well, that's right. And when he was in the cave, the Montessori cave, and Sancho said, how can you say that was real and fake? And what I experienced, I can't remember what it was that he brought up, but and he would just discount him. He wouldn't tell him, Sancho, you got to think this way. He would just say, oh, you're just enchanted, or it was this, or it was that, or something else that just kept him in the place that he wanted to be, but he wasn't. But Sancho would always come around and go, yeah, maybe you're right.
Well, and it reminded me of Dan Crenshaw's book. Dan Crenshaw wrote a book called Fortitude, and he's an ex-Navy SEAL. He's a senator from Texas, and he wrote this book called Fortitude. And at the end of that book, he was talking about how we tell the right story of the history of America, and that phrase really stuck out to me. I was like, how do you decide what the right story is? Because it's like you can look at this event, and it's like, yes, you can talk about it from this one angle, and it makes us look like the good guys, and then you can talk about it from this other angle, and it makes us look like the bad guys. So what's the right story, right? And his definition of it was, the right story is the story that balances both of the extremes. And is focused on moving forward in a healthy way.
Oh, that's cool.
Right? And so it was this idea, because at first I was like, well, like there is no right story to tell. There's the one side and the other, you know, and he's like, no, there is. Like, the right story is when we look at the both extremes of the thing, and we choose to meld them together and focus on moving forward in unity, and moving forward in healing, and moving forward. And so it's this idea of like, the right story is the thing that's focused on moving forward.
That's interesting.
Right? And not just like all this stuff in the past or all this stuff right now. It's how do we move forward? And so it's the same thing. It's like, the right insanity is the thing that's focused on moving forward in more personal responsibility, and in more personal self-control, and because that's like everything about Don Quixote is personal discipline.
Yeah, it is.
So it's like
totally
the
is.
right insanity is the insanity that moves us forward collectively in more personal discipline.
But talking about
control,
moving forward in that insanity, when he lost his battle, and that fake guy, the one who Caruso, who wanted to help him. So Don Quixote was defeated, and he was told, you have to go home and rest for a year, and you can't pick up your arms for a year. His hope was that he would find his sanity and go on with life. The fake knight who because he defeated him. I didn't even realize, it didn't click with me that it was the one that he had defeated before.
Yeah, he had already defeated before.
But it was just so interesting how he changed from, both of them, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, changed from the nightlife to the pastoral, the knight, K-N-I-G-H, to the pastoral, and this is what we're going to do, and this is our names, and it's like, wow, it was so funny.
Even then, it's like that still lines up where it's like, that was still focused on, and now we have this vision and this identity, and now we're moving forward in that. And so this is our new name, and this is the new way that we're going to work, and this is how whatever. And it's all still in line, even though it's still this insanity. It's all insanity that is leading towards more personal discipline and more personal control and whatever, as opposed to, the Duke and the Duchess and everyone else leaning into this insanity that just leads to just blah.
I mean,
I don't know what that word is, but blah.
But blah. I really thought they were more. I didn't find as much pleasure in them wanting to pull jokes on him as I did in how he lived in his world. It was, I don't know, it's hard for me to explain. Other than I just kind of felt like, well, Altisidora was the one that really just that would just really wore me out. But the Duke and Duchess, I mean, they were very polite and kind to him, but they sure milked him for all his insanity. That's for this. Yeah.
And it's like I say, it lines up to me with that, like, what's the right story to tell? And it's like, what's this right kind of insanity? And it's like the right kind of madness and the right kind of insanity does it lead to essentially like more like fruit of the spirit in your life and in other people's life?
Well, and
everything
if he does, then it does. Yeah. And I mean, they commend themselves to God. Yeah. And doing all that is right and good. When he says that he was deep in thought, there his thoughts like flies round honey set upon him and stung him. Thoughts that sting you. I mean, that's so beautifully written. And so they're talking about he's writing about the pastoral life. And I will call myself shepherd Quixote, Quixote, and you shepherd Panzino. And we will wander through the mountains, woods, and meadows, singing here, lamenting there, drinking of the liquid crystals of the springs, or of the limpid streams, or the mighty rivers. The oaks shall give us their sweetest fruit with generous hands. The trunks of the hard cork trees shall offer us seats. The willows shade, the roses perfume, the broad meadows carpets of 1,000 blended colors. The clear pure air shall grant us breath. The moon and the stars their light, despite the darkness of the night. Song shall afford us delight and tears gladness. Apollo verses and lover theme, whereby we shall be able to win eternal fame, not only in the present age but in those to come. So that even still goes back to his knight. It's his eternal fame. Forever and ever. God's truth, exclaimed Sancho. But that kind of life squares with me exactly, and corners too. I mean, it's so, and then they just go on. And then they're going to get Bachelor Samson Carrasco, who was the knight. They're going to get him to come. And no doubt, then they'll call him Shepherd Samsonio and the Shepherd Carrascan. Then they're going to get the barber and all these people that he's like, come on, we're going to all go in and we're going to just live all this wonderful life. It's just hysterical. Yeah. It's totally hysterical.
It's so good. That's so good. All right. Well, I think that's most of the things that I had marked. I definitely want to talk about that one part. All right. So then with that, I think the last question that I had was just what are you reading next? What are you doing now?
We're doing the brothers. No,
I believe in you. You can do it.
Ramon. I don't know. If I could see the name, I could pretty much pronounce it.
Karamazov.
Karamazov?
Karamazov.
Oh, I thought it was an R. Okay, I didn't remember
close
it all.
enough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
another big book.
Yeah.
But not as fast as this one.
Yeah. So Kim and I have been going through that list. I'll link that again in this, but the 12 great Christian novels from Memoria Press, the homeschool curriculum that we use. And so the next one that we had was Brothers Karamazov. So I ended up getting Mom a copy of that.
Yeah,
and
I'm included
the
on
next
this
one
one
that we'll do, we'll see if we can do a sit down. Maybe even if we have to do it, we'll do it with a Zoom conversation. But we'll do a sit down with me and Mom and Kim.
That'd be fun.
And so and then we'll deal with that one. So, anyways, I think that's all I got. Thank you guys for hanging in with us. I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't read this book and you are interested,
I think you should.
If you aren't interested in this, watch other videos because I have a gajillion other books that
And I
are
guess
easier
is
starts.
there movies of Don Quixote?
I don't know. There's a really old black and white one,
there
but I
is.
don't know that there's. I've never seen it, and I don't know if there's a good one. I'm not entirely sure. So I kind of want to find out.
It'd be
'Cause I would be
interesting. I
interested
can't
to-
imagine the character with no teeth when he got his teeth knocked out.
I have no idea how they would do some
Him,
of it. I was thinking
tall
about
and
that.
lanky, and his horse,
I don't know how you would make this work.
Oh,
But thank you guys.
Thank you.
And like, subscribe, do all the things.
Yeah, he
And-
does a great job. I'm kind of proud of him.
Thanks. I had a real good teacher in school.
Yeah.
But yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, honey. It was
And we'll
fun.
see you next time.
Bye.